So hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and I've recently got into Liquid Death. I'm not sponsored or anything. I just have gotten into it, and I thought that this one labeled Doctor Death seemed pretty appropriate this evening, considering that poor Raffle is now dead, and we've jettisoned ourselves 10 years into the future. No big deal, but yeah. So we're on episode 4 of Orb on the movements of the Earth. And yeah, our main character is dead. We seem to have a new main character. We know nothing about him. So we're just diving right in, aren't we? But before we get any further, I do have some comments to talk about. I want to issue a massive apology over the last 2 episodes. Because it's been pointed out to me on it was pointed out to me through Patreon when episode 2 aired on Patreon, that I was saying Norwalk instead of Nowak. And then I was like, oh, I'm like, well, surely I didn't say that in episode 3. And then I went back and listened to the commentary this evening before starting this episode for episode 3, and it was like Norwalk, 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 and I was like, oh, I felt like the meme of the Japanese mascot that's like trying to get away from the bombs and dodge them. I was like, no, I failed horribly. So I had to put a comment on YouTube immediately. I was like, oh my God, do not put me in a corner. I know that I meant Nowak. I said Norwalk. I think because it sounds like narwhals. That's where my brain went. Romania's brain goes fun places sometimes with pronunciation, and it went into the wrong hole. So Nowak. No whack. No whack. that's no whack. That's why I'm just gonna have to, it's like, that's no good. That's no whack. I'm gonna have to find a way to make my brain remember no whack, but I'm sorry that I said Norwalk 1,000 times. I would say take a sip every time you heard Romania say Norwalk the last 2 episodes, but you'd probably be in the hospital. Unless you're sipping water. So no whack. I'm going to do my best no whack, because I have a feeling, my personal theory is that no whack is going to show up. I think no whack, the mercenary enforcer who started out our series being this punisher and dispenser of justice with the church that's been favored by the bishop. I feel like if anybody's going to be a centralized character for part of this series, it's going to be Nowak. I think Nowak is going to be our central character, and everything might revolve around him. But who knows? He could die this episode. He may never be seen again. Who knows? It's all bets are off, right? So fun times. I do have a couple comments I want to talk about before we dive into this episode. Bison Gaming in the Discord back in episode 1 said Raffle had talked about how the world is so easy. Oh, my heart. Oh, seeing that now when episode 3 happens and how the world is so easy, but it's not, like that phrase comes full circle. Oh my God. Just absolutely slays me. I love it. Geen and Truck are our cult leaders, aka moderators for this series. And Geen said with episode 1, fun fact, Hubert's voice actor is Hayami Sho, the man who voices Aizen in Bleach. And I was like, oh, see, I grew up watching Bleach. I've watched so many seasons of Bleach, but since I'm in the US, and because at the time when I watched Bleach, the internet was not as popular nor as accessible to finding subs, I watched most of Bleach in the English dub. So Johnny Young Bosch and all that. So, and Kyle Hebert voices Aizen in that. So I was used to Kyle Hebert as the voice actor for Aizen, but that's cool to know. Another thing is Raffle's voice actor is a woman. Her name is Amaya Sakamoto, and she is famous for giving her voice to young boys in anime. You might recognize her as Ciel from Black Butler. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I have watched a little bit of Black Butler in the sub, so I did recognize now that you said that. I was like, oh, I can tell that voice. That's cool. So yeah, so thank you, Geen, for that information. And then Tiny Truck for episode 1 says some interesting tidbits about the show's Japanese name, Chi Chikyu no Undo ni Suite. The interesting part here is a katakana pronunciation of chi. Since it's katakana and not kanji, it can basically mean any Japanese word with the same pronunciation. And some of the more notable meanings are earth, wisdom, or blood. as well as many others. We can conclude that it mainly means Earth, as we've seen from the show's logo. The logo is shown at the start when the narrator's asking about obtaining the truth of the world, and at the end when Hubert says heliocentrism. And in the logo, there is a chi rotated by a small circle. But because of how Japanese works and how the author specifically decided to go with the katakana, any definition of chi should be equally as correct. I love that. That feels so intentional because the whole story is about like everyone finding their own truths and pursuing their own truths. So having the exact title be a way of finding your own like way in it is just, it's so good. It's so good. I love it so much. So yes. So I have just been in love with this series so far. It has been amazing. I have been gobbling it up. And I'm so glad to start the 4th episode because I feel like I have been patiently waiting. This is the first day where I've officially caught up with other things I need to be reacting to. And I'm like, okay, I have a free day. What do you want to watch? Well, it's going to be Orb. Of course it's going to be Orb. So yes. We're going to see. We're going to see how this works and who we end up following now that Raffle's gone and Hubert's gone. Half the main cast is dead, so who knows? Who knows indeed. But we have someone that's found Raffle's stash of information about heliocentrism, so we need to figure out who they are. But thank you all for watching with me. Thank you for all your support and kindness. I appreciate it. We are going to start episode 4 of Orb on the Movements of the Earth. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Oh, buddy. Oh, buddy. Okay. All right. So, Akshi is interesting. I'm okay with this. I am okay with having a different character. I feel personally that I talked about it last week, every so many episodes, we will probably have a new character. And if this series is about these people who, I like that it's going from different angles because Raffle was not a morally despairing character. He was this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young lad who was smart and intelligent, and I love the concept that he took Hubert's work and laid this new framework, and now there's like a cult of Orb, literally, within this story that have looked and drawn upon his works. I think it's a bit risky telling the men there about the works because they could just go and burn it, but we'll talk about that when we get to that scene. But if this series, here's my thoughts on it. I think we're probably going to follow Akshi and Gras for like 3 or 4 episodes like we did with Raffle, maybe a little bit more because they're older and have more options than Raffle in terms of the plot and what they can do with them, depending on how quickly they get themselves into a corner. But there's 2 of them, so we might get more than 3 episodes since there's both Gras and Akshi to worry about. But I feel like we're going to follow them for a while. Then whoever this blonde man is. Now, Akshi in the OP is with the blonde guy that has all the scars. So that'll be kind of cool to see who he ends up being. Maybe Akshi will last more than just a couple episodes. That'd be fun. Akshi is fascinating. Akshi has a lot of things we can do with him. I thought, honestly, to tell you all the truth, from the OP, I thought up until last episode that the guy with the eye patch and all the scars was going to be Raffle. And then when they were talking about Raffle getting arrested and possibly tortured, I was like, oh, the OP was a spoiler, and that guy's gonna end up being Raffle, and he's gonna get like all scarred up and then released. No. Nope. Not at all. Although, Nowak, here's my thoughts. I feel like we're gonna follow the girl who I think is Nowak's daughter. I think so. We'll see. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. The blonde guy with the scars, and then Akshi. They're featured in the ED. So we're definitely following those 3 in their journey and how it coincides and collides with Raffle's initial start with Hubert's work and revising it. But I honestly think that Nowak is going to be the through thread. I feel like Nowak is going to be the thread throughout all of the stories. And I think the old man in the OP is Nowak. I think it will all come around. And by the end of Nowak's life, he'll believe in heliocentrism. And it will all come full circle, literally a full orbit with him reflecting back on Raffle's words. I could be wrong. I've been wrong so many times in this series, but we'll see what happens. That's just based on the OP and what we're seeing now. And then with the ED, I think that's what's going to happen. But We'll see if I'm right, if I'm wrong, if I'm challenged, what I'm right and wrong about. We'll just see about that. But this episode's title will not fit in the thumbnail, I can tell right now, on YouTube, which is the fact that this world is far more beautiful than heaven. So what's kind of interesting about this is not only do the heretics seem like a fun time, but I love that these concepts that Hubert introduced about Hubert wanting the world to be beautiful is kind of like the heretic mantra. It's literally about finding the beauty in this world. And we start out with Akshi and the story of him, and him starting out with saying that the sky is beautiful. And unfortunately for Akshi, unfortunately for him, he's brainwashed very early on to the point where he's like just traumatized pretty much. But he said the sky was beautiful, but then why? And I feel like the sad thing is he has this beautiful, like, starry-eyed look into the night sky, and then his eyesight is instantly dimmed by what he sees around him in the world. And it's basically all these people just throwing shit down. The peasants, bloody peasants, throwing it down to them, the nobility. Yeah, of them just throwing down shit to them. Ugh. And staring down at them as being oppressed. So Akshi experiences, as someone from the lower class in this world, Akshi experiences the prejudice and oppression that his class faces. And he's like, well, why? And he views it as ugly. He has this beautiful sky around him, but he's like, why is our world ugly? He's like, why is the world this way? And he's taught from an early age that the world is not a beautiful place. And that's just to subjugate people, for sure, 100%. Because we have this monk here who's like, it's because the earth is at the center of the universe. Now, you may be hearing this monk's turn of phrase and going, that seems like a crock of shit. And you would be fair to say so, because the earth is the center. He says, because the earth is the center of the universe, to be at the center is to be at the bottom. Now, I don't know. Does being at the center and being at the bottom seem like they're two different things? Yes. But they basically say that Earth is the center of the underworld, and that is what is known. It is known, and that is what humanity has to wade through. But all of this is to get to the point of saying that the world is a terrible place and that you have to do right by the church so you can escape that ugliness to heaven. And again, this is kind of going back to what Hubert was talking about, because it's one of those, it's expanding a little bit more about the religious side of heaven and hell and all of that. But the fact is that Hubert was talking about early on in the series that the world is beautiful. And don't you think that God would give you a beautiful world to cherish and treasure before in the lifespan that you have? But the way that the church has phrased it is it's a way to control an audience, saying, well, no, the world is actually ugly. Heaven's what you got to strive for. And we have a series of rules that's going to get you into heaven. And if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get into heaven. But if you don't, you're not going to. And you don't want that, because think of how nasty the world is. And if you think this world's nasty, hell's even worse. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, depending on your religion, depending on your faith or lack thereof, you may believe that heaven exists. You may believe that it doesn't. You may believe that your soul transcends and reincarnates, or that it doesn't and it goes to an alternate place. But regardless, it very much is the fact that this is something made up by mankind as a way of controlling a population, in a sense. At least in this case it is, with what they are saying. They are saying, oh no, you got to follow our guidebook here, or else you're not going to make it at the end of the tunnel, right? That's how God created things. And so then Akshi asks why, and the guy said God made the earth a lowly place full of corruption to remind us that humankind is helpless and sinful. And he's like, the sky above looks so beautiful. And he says, it's because the sky above looks beautiful because you're gazing at it from this corrupt realm. Again, we talk about modern times. A tactic used by authoritarians and people trying to control others is to tell them how bad something is. And this is the part that's kind of crazy about this, and I want to phrase this right because what I'm saying will sound contradictory for a second. But there is a difference between pointing out the flaws of a system in order to learn from it and to make those flaws not happen again, and then pointing out how awful something is to make people believe that you have the answer to fixing that awfulness and making it better. There's a difference, right? So, for example, there is a difference between saying, oh, well, right now, and I'm just going to get political for a hot second, so humor me for 30 seconds. There was an article that came out today that said that in my country, there was a look back. And this has been on the table for a long time, for decades, but there are some people that believe that because we talk about bad things that our country has done, that means that we don't believe in our country, and that means that we are viewing it as this ugly thing and we're not celebrating all that's good about it. Now, you can go a lot of places with that, right? And this is not a politics video or anything like that, but there is a difference in, sometimes you need to point out the ugliness of what has been done so that you can go, that was really shitty. Let's not do that again. And there's a difference with that than in this scene with the monk. The monk is not saying, oh, hey, there's been some stuff in the past that was wrong. Let's rectify it and do it right and learn from it and progress. That's not what the monk is saying. The monk is saying, well, our world is shitty and terrible, and we have to do our best to go with what the church is saying is right, and then we'll be released from our sin and we'll be able to advance into heaven. But it's just basically doing the same routine and keeping in a status quo. It's not evolving or progressing or being self-aware. It's just keeping with what you've always done in the hopes that you will be rewarded. But it's a very selfish thing because it's not recognizing anyone else but yourself, right? Whereas what Hubert was talking about was kind of going beyond that. So I'm going to get my political soapbox there for a second. But anyway, there is a difference. Earth is at the bottom of the universe. Why don't the stars fall from the sky? And then the monk doesn't have an answer to that question because they don't understand how to explain gravity and how all that works and about atmosphere and ozones and things. So he's like, oh, well, we don't know that. But humans can only comprehend the realm in which we live, which is bullshit. That is dodging the question 101, right? So, but it frames in that moment where he's like, the heavens are sublime, solemn, they don't mingle with the lowly earth. And you see all of the eyes. I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that Akshi has an obsession with eyes. He apparently has good eyes, but he has an obsession with them. He's connected to eyeballs, to eyes. Akshi is. Also in the OP, he's with the guy that's lost an eye, so that sounds interesting. I'm curious to know what his story is going to be when we see that. But yes, then we cut to Akshi as an adult. And he looks around, looks up. He has beautiful eyes if he didn't look like he hadn't slept in 10 years. But anyway, so we have Gras. We have Akshi and Gras. There are two. It sounds like oxen and grass, so it's kind of fun. And so Akshi and him are executioners. They are duelists. They go out and find people and duel them and kill them. My, how the ways. And we used to just burn people alive. Now we'll just kill them in the streets. Why not? He's like, the stars look so clear and beautiful tonight. Gras's story is interesting. Gras is an interesting character, and we're going to talk about him because he's so excited about the stars and he's hopeful with it. And he's like, have you ever looked at them with your eyes? I'm sure the stars are quite vivid. So apparently he has a good eyesight, right? Apparently that's what he's known for. I don't know if it's because he has blue eyes. Are they like, back then, do they believe blue eyes are special or something? And he says, oh, well, no, I don't like to gaze at the sky. And he's like, well, why? He's like, you've transferred here for a year. He's like, we should celebrate. And no, Huckleberry. But so they go to work first, right? We'll get back to talking about Gras and his whole thing with his past experiences. The OP, the fact that they changed the OP to be Akshi's face, oh my god, love it. Actually, his eyes are like gray. They're like stormy gray, but maybe he just has really good eyesight, and that's what they talk about. I'm in love with the fact that they changed the OP. I hate that it's not Raffle. I was really hoping they'd just keep Raffle and fake out and we could watch him every episode, but whatever. But that is awesome. I love it. So anyway, this episode, the fact that this world is far more beautiful in heaven. We meet this random guy out here. So he'd been assigned to a duel, and Akshi says he'll do it, and they're from the civilian watch. And the guy's like, oh, well, I thought the noble was going to come face me. And they're like, no, the noble guy picked us as his champion. So sorry about that. Yeah, I kept waiting for like a jump scare with this guy to get like his eyes sliced out or his nose cut off. But no, they just slit his throat and that was it. Akshi looks like with the executioner's mask on, he looks so just haunting. His eyes, like he looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days. He just looks haunted, right? He's like, why'd I have to fight you bloody peasants? And they're like, nope, we're your champions. He's like, but if I lose, I die. And he's like, yep, that's how it works. Like, it's kind of refreshing almost after Nowak torturing them and ripping their nails out, where these guys are like, no, we're just going to kill you. So hope you're cool with that. It's pretty on the nose. We'll talk about Nowak when we get to him. But he thought he had him, and it didn't work. I think this knife he has is really cool. It's basically this knife that's got edges to it. Like, I don't know if it's supposed to be like a army knife or something. But the guy's like, I don't want to die. And it's funny how the nobility, when faced with their own mortality, are like, oh, but I have money. And they're like, yeah, well, but we're doing this job. And he's like, you have nothing against me, right? Murder is a terrible sin. So you really don't want to do this, do you? And he's like, well, to be honest, I don't. This is the part that's interesting, is the discussion that comes up about Akshi's profession. So the nobleman says, well, you all are executioners. And what you're doing is a sin itself. So how do you think you're getting into heaven when you're committing this sin of murder? And then he's like, well, sorry, but this is my job. And then he just stabs him and that's it. And poor Akshi, he looks really sad about it. But Akshi's having a moral crisis because Akshi seems to have inadvertently, in his innocent ways, stumbled across the contradiction and hypocrisy of the system, which is the fact that they're executioners. It's a sin to kill, but yet they are doing it. So this man that tells them to burn in hell in his last breaths, he's like, y'all are hypocrites, burn in hell for killing me. That gets to Akshi. And man, I love the shot of Akshi looking at him. And when he takes the mask off and looks down, like it's clearly affected him, right? So Gras tries to commend him and say he's impressed by him. He's like, are you okay? And then he's like, do you think he went to heaven? Well, by the fact that the church sent you to kill him, I would say the church would tell you no, because why else would they send you to kill him unless he had committed a sin? I guess at this point they have not made clear in the episode, and this is a rhetorical question. I don't expect you all to ask it or answer it. But there's clearly a difference between the nobility hiring the duelists and the executioners to kill each other versus the heretics that are sent to burn at the stake and face, possibly not burn at the stake, because why transport them for a different fate? So it's been 10 years. Maybe the punishments have gone up since then. But I do think it's interesting that there's a difference there. And Akshi's like, I'm worried. Doing this work, I've seen many people face imminent death. And he says, not a single one seemed to die in satisfaction. And I was like, Akshi, you sweet black Labrador of a man. If I was being charged by the church to die, why would you think I would die in satisfaction? And I lost a duel that resulted in the end of my life? Sir, why do you think I would be satisfied in my death? Like, no. And then from there, he says they all passed away in terror. Well, yeah, as if they saw the entrance to hell. And it's like, no, they didn't see the entrance to hell. They were dying, and they were like, you sons of bitches, you killed me. Could it be that only a handful of people go to heaven? And that's it's like the church making, at this point in time in the story, the church making up like a FOMO scarcity of only certain people are going to get into heaven and only the elite few can get to heaven. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because the whole time I was watching this episode, I was like, are they studying the Old Testament? Are we not listening to Jesus in this? Because I was like, the whole thing is just about everything that was happening here read very Old Testament, which, here's the thing. If you're going to control a population or try to manipulate them through scripture, you would probably go with the Old Testament and not the New Testament, because the New Testament, Jesus is like, hey, let's all love each other and be kind to one another, and the world is beautiful. And the Old Testament's like, man, but these people could die. It's like, ah. So yeah, I just kept sitting there being like, are they Jewish? Are they just reading the Old Testament? Like, no offense, but Jesus would be like, maybe don't do that. So it's interesting. It's interesting. If so, a murderer like me will never make it, which, yes, you are confronting the hypocrisy of the church in this moment, which it's interesting that Akshi has this conversation. Akshi's so innocent that he feels obligated to ask Gras about it. I feel like Nowak has already mentally rationalized why he has to do it. That's why Nowak was interesting last episode, because I felt like at first he was just, doing a job to protect his daughter, and he didn't really believe in the church. He was just doing the torturing because that's what was assigned to him, like kind of like Akshi, where it was a job. But then by the time he has the conversation with Raffle in episode 3, he is saying, well, but the church's teachings, and you realize that Nowak is a little bit more ingrained in the church than he had let on. So that got interesting real quick. And that's when Gras asks, what do you like best about our world? Because here's the thing, Nowak has something in the world that does ground him to his job, and that's his daughter, or at least as far as we know, it's his daughter, right? Times have changed in this series so far, so we don't know, but that's the case so far. Whereas Akshi doesn't really have anybody. He seems like he's an orphan and he's alone, so he doesn't have anybody to kind of like grip him to this world. And then Gras is a whole nother subject, which we'll get into it. It's inappropriate to like anything about this corrupt realm. And Gras is like, no, that's not true. I thought it was interesting that the stuff that Gras was talking about, I was sitting here going, that seems like stuff that would make you a heretic in the eyes of these people, but it's not. And when he started talking about Mars, I'm like, wouldn't that make you a heretic? But maybe they don't know what he's doing. It seemed like nobody else knew what Gras had started to record and were doing that made him be hopeful. They just knew he was in a better mood, and they were like, okay. It also makes sense why they probably distanced themselves from Gras, because he had tried to commit suicide and then failed, and the people were probably like, we're going to leave you alone, sir. So it's interesting. He's like, don't ever cast things aside. There's something that'll give you hope and free you from despair. And so he's like, we've known each other for a year. And he's like, I want to know what makes you happy. So then, Akshi goes into this big rant, this very fastly worded rambling of being like, you'll hurt less if you give up from the very beginning, or rather nothing enjoyable ever happens in life anyway. Like, this is straight up like he drunk the Kool-Aid of the cult reciting this, because this is some indoctrination bullshit right here. And saying that only those who are happy are those born few, they're born with select privilege. I kept thinking of Attack on Titan in this moment, and that the line of we're all born special. And here it's the opposite, where it's like, oh no, only a select few are special. Like that is trying to associate power and privilege. And it's like, no, actually we are all born special. It's what we accumulate and how we contribute it to, what do we consider wealth, right? For those who aren't chosen, trying to be happy is useless. The only hope is heaven. That's the indoctrination. It's like, you are not happy. You are not ever going to be satisfied. Your only hope is to get to heaven. And the only way to get to heaven is through the church, is through them. So that's where all of that comes in, right? And he's like, heaven is wonderful. And he's like, I want to go now. And then Gras is like, whoa. And the thing about it is, now it makes more sense why they darkened out Gras's face there, because he had committed suicide. So in that moment when Akshi is like, oh, I just want to leave this mortal realm and go there now, telling that to somebody who tried to attempt their life, it's like pretty on the nose. But he's like, in other words, he's like, because there's nothing perfect or eternal here, you don't think, you basically don't think that it's worth it. And he's like, well, no, not, I didn't think that. He's like, I get it. So he's like, in truth, I was just like you not too long ago. But he's like, but then I found what I believe in, which is going to come back with the heretic too. So he takes him to the top of the roof. But before that, they go to the bar. And I thought that was a cool scene with the bar, the patrons, where the nobility there originally don't want the assassins or the executioners there because they're not on the same level as the nobility. But you have two different approaches. Gras is taking it from an equilateral approach, saying, well, we all can be here because we're part of the guild, like you. And we're actually, even if we're different classes, we're all equal here in this building. Akshay just basically goes crazy and scares him off by begging for forgiveness and saying, I apologize for being born. And he's like, if you apologize sincerely, they'll forgive you. And it's like, or if you act crazy, they'll distance themselves from you. So yeah. So then Gras takes him to the roof. He's like, look, I have my observations of Mars. So he's been tracing the constellations and how Mars has rotated around the world. And for the last 2 years, he's been waiting for it to all come full circle and make this at the end. So I honestly, funny enough, did not really realize what was going on with astronomy. I'm like, what is happening? What is going on? But when they go to the rooftop to check things out, now the one guy, he seems to have noticed what's happening and saying that, he says, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you did choose the wrong time to begin your observation. Like he already knew about what I'm about to tell you all about with Mars, which is funny because then when he gets to the top, he notices that it's going backwards and not in a complete circle. It started February 9th, and then he calculated it in July, and then in December, and now it's October. And it's not completed the full rotation. So here's the thing. Two things before we get into talk of why Mars went backwards instead of completing the circle. I thought it was interesting that the nobility and these guys in the bar could talk freely about the stars and about astronomy, and nobody was calling them heretics. I guess because they work for the church and they're not questioned. And I guess because the nobility, it's one of those, it's a very kind of odd and frustrating example of privilege, and how back when Nowak, they were talking about how he had been employed by the bishop, and they're like, oh, the bishop having a mercenary. It's like, well, he's the bishop, so he must, whatever he says goes. It's kind of one of those things. Like the nobility can get away with it, but a commoner could not. And that's kind of the injustice. But anyway, so I was like, I tried to look up. I'm like, why does Mars' orbit appear to be backwards sometimes? Epicycles is an explanation. Or if you have friends that are into astrology, they might talk about how Mercury is in retrograde. Mercury is indeed in retrograde, but here it's Mars. So what it is beginning a few months before Mars is opposite the sun and ending a few months afterwards, Mars appears to stop and then reverse for a while, then stop and resume its normal motion. During that time, Mars is said to be in retrograde. And Steve Dutch on Quora talks about this, but they have some models on here, so we're going to look at that too. But basically, Mars is in retrograde. The stuff that is, again, this kind of ties to this concept of faith with Gras, because if Gras would have stuck with it, would have stuck with his observations a little bit longer. Like when he got to the top of the roof and saw that Mars was not completing the full circle, he said that it was ugly because, we talked about with Raffle and Hubert that the perfect circle was what was beautiful. It was symmetrical, it was beautiful, it was complete. And here you have Gras realizing that since Mars isn't making the complete circle, it's ugly, it's distorted, it's not complete, it's imperfect. But if he just kept with it a little bit longer, it would eventually gone around in a perfect circle. He just had to wait a little bit. And that there is a concept of faith. If he had faith to wait a little bit longer and to stick with it, then his patience would have been rewarded. And it's like how many times do we give up on something and then you think, oh, if I had stuck with that, it could have worked out. And this is a prime example. So it said the ancient Greeks had two main models for what was going on. One was that Mars was on a sphere encircling the Earth, and there was another sphere within the sphere of Mars that accounted for the retrograde motion. Every planet had a set of spheres, plus there had to be an idler sphere separating them from another. This probably accounts for the myth that the model entailed dozens and dozens of spheres. It did not. I've looked at the Alphonsine tables based on ancient Greek ideas, and they are no more complicated than some pre-computer numerical tables I've seen. Can you picture the model above? That's probably why more histories focus on Ptolemy's model of circles. So Ptolemy pictured this. So we have two different things. We have one that is the Earth at the center, which is kind of what the church believes now. And then there is this deferent ring here. And then over here is this epicycle where there's a planet orbiting over here, and the Earth is over here, and the planet orbiting is just kind of going around the Earth, and that's why it accounts for that. The other thing is that you have the sun, and then you have the Earth around it, and then you have the planet's orbit, like Mars, around that. And so it looks more like kind of our solar system does today. It says on the left is the planet traveling on a big circle, the deferent or the carrier around. The planet in turn is moving on a smaller circle, the epicycle. This is mathematically the same as concentric sphere models, but it's easier to picture. On the right is the modern picture. As the Earth overtakes Mars, Mars appears to drop just behind, like passing a car on the highway. Boy, that Ptolemy sure was dumb. He didn't even know how the planets move unevenly because they're in elliptical orbits. Well, guess what? He knew planets moved unevenly, although he didn't think of ellipses. Instead, he pictured orbits being off-center. So there's a whole thing about Ptolemy in here, which is pretty cool, which they have a Copernican model as well. There's a lot of fun stuff. It's cool. But yeah, so I like the idea that we learned Mars is in retrograde. That's why it doesn't. But at the time, Gras does not know how to describe this. And he gets really disheveled and loses hope, because this was the one thing that after losing his family and almost taking his life had given him hope and meaning. And Akshi definitely appears to be like someone that would offer reassuring, kind words of, you know, that he'd be like, it'll be all right. He seems like somebody that would try to be encouraging, but he just doesn't know exactly what to do. So we see it was very Monty Python humor, seeing the executioners, like in the background, there's two executioners fighting, and this one guy's like, oh, hey, how's Gras? Like, while this guy's getting killed in the background, like it's nothing. He's like, you were paired with a weirdo like Gras. And he's like, oh, well, he's a very optimistic person. And they're like, that's the problem. So he talks about how, before he says, Gras used to be a fairly average guy. He complained as much as anyone. But then, at one point, his entire family died of the plague. And so that was when he lost all hope and tried to end his own life. Which is awful, that he felt that that was all he could do without his family. The thing was, he failed. And so the failure was... I find it interesting that the church chose to forgive him for that sin, because usually, like, suicide is not viewed favorably at all by the church. Which, don't do that, please. But the truth is he regretted surviving. But over the past year or two, he had suddenly grown cheerful. It's really sad. I hate it. Because he talks about there that had started to go backwards. The perfect circle is broken. I do love that shot of him crying. That's probably going to be the thumbnail for this week, is the shot of Gras crying in that moment. And what's so sad about it is that he had tried to find some control and some sense of beauty in his life after losing his family, something to probably justify and give it meaning. And when that circle couldn't even be complete and it started to regress, he's like, is this a representation of me? Am I as broken as this circle? Like, he was just projecting his own view of himself onto this. Is this my fate? So, and then of course Akshi's like, well, don't you want to stargaze? He's like, no, we got a job to do. So the heretic, Damien, we have our Inquisitor Damien. He was around 10 years ago with Raffle. And we get the heretic who looks Hubert adjacent. So Nowak is indeed the man. Nowak is indeed the man with the hair here. Now, I want to point something out. I don't know what we're going to do about that, but I thought that maybe the kid in the green that Raffle had talked about from episode 1 was Akshi, but it's not. But I'm going to show you all this. I'd paused this back in episode 1 as the screenshot, and I hadn't thought anything about it until last episode when Akshi was on like the end of the episode, and I was like, this is where the original title was for the episode. That's Nowak. Is that Akshi getting tortured? I don't know. Why is Akshi getting tortured? I mean, if you told me it was because him and Gras went to the mountain to find the Raffles secret words and started believing in heliocentrism, maybe. I'm like, is Akshi gonna get killed by Nowak and that's how his tale's gonna end? Is he gonna choose? Is this a choose your own adventure? And Raffle chose the poppy seed poison and Akshi's gonna choose the torture? I don't know. We're gonna find out together and see if that's where it leads. But yeah, to be fair, Nowak I think the beard, I usually don't like facial hair on men. I think Nowak looks good with the beard. It does make him look older and more distinguished, but he can work it. I don't know what the hell he's doing on top of his head, but what's interesting is that it's been 10 years since Raffle died in front of him. I still think that 12-year-old young man shook him to the core, and I want to see, like, what... I'm surprised they took 2 different vehicles. Honestly, 2 different carriages with the heretic. I'm curious to see what Nowak does about all this. Now, the heretic was not with them at the end of episode 3, and Gras had a black eye. So what happened between the end of this episode and episode 3's ending? I don't know. I guess that's what we're going to find out next week, right? But yeah, so what's funny is that Akshi says don't talk to the heretic, and then he ends up talking the most to him. Because he's like, I pity you. Why would you give up your own place in heaven? But execution for you is unavoidable. You could reconsider and recant before you die. And he's like, would the church really bring you salvation? Like, the heretic here is kind of like, look, I've been studying up Raffles' documents, and I don't know. I don't know if that's really going to be the answer. Does heaven exist as they speak? I do believe that there is, I'd like to believe there is something after our existence. Do I think it's the heaven that's talked about? I don't know. I'm curious. I don't like to get too existential because it makes me sad. Nobody wants to think of their own mortality, right? He says you turn blindly to heaven. I think that's the big point of it. You're not thinking of what you're doing on earth. You're just thinking blindly that, like, everything I do, as long as I get to heaven, it's fine. And it's like, but what you do on earth matters. It's very important. And so he's like, well, we know what you're trying to do. You're trying to push us, you're trying to push us into something else. He's like, well, you're the ones pushing despair away. You're the ones running. He was like, what does he talk about there? I want to go back to that conversation. The philosophy of today was born when an elderly Athenian drank from a poisoned chalice 2,000 years ago. And he says the church of today grew from grief over a young man's crucifixion. Like, let's bring up the Jesus. Now, 1,500 years ago, so that means we're around 1,500 AD, maybe, possibly. But he talks about how the church wants humans to have hope from the ashes of tragedy, but primal suffering. But he talks about how primal suffering, what does he say there? Temporary relief from pain will never change reality. But primal suffering, seething frustration, or even your own despair can be turned into hope. So that part is really powerful because you have Akshi, who has just, been told the indoctrination that the heretic is talking about. He's like, all that they're doing in this is giving you these stories. He's like, but all it's doing is these stories that have been told to you as a means of getting you to do what the church wants you to do. He's like, all that's ending up doing in the long run is just feeding you these stories that will make you produce hope from the tragedy happening. But he's like, but the people telling these stories have not been through the shit. It's not changing reality. It's those of you that have suffered life and death situations, which is Gras, and, him almost taking his own life. He's like, those of you that have really suffered, that have really faced frustration, like the suffering of nearly losing your life, the frustration of losing your entire family, you can turn that despair into hope, and you want to. And that's what reaches Gras. Akshi is not moved because he's not experienced that, but Gras has. And that's when he says, instead, you turn to the third hand guarantee of life after death. Like, it's not even like first hand, it's not second hand, it's third hand. Hope will never smile upon people like you. And that's when Gras stands up and Akshi, talks to the heretic. He's like, I know all too well why you fear people who are called that. Deep down, you yourself do not fully believe in heaven. He's like, well, you don't speak for me. And he's like, oh, do I? He says, there is no heaven and death is the end. That's what you believe, isn't it? It's interesting because the heretic, that's not what he necessarily believes. He's just doing some reverse psychology on Akshi, saying the reason why you're so concerned when the nobleman that dies is in terror, he's like, but if they're going to heaven, they shouldn't be. But he's like questioning it himself, and the heretic calls him out on it. I know why you're worried. Losing your appointment in the afterlife is hard. But in fact, all humankind should confront that possibility. I like that the heretic is not saying that it's going to happen or not going to happen. He's not saying there's no heaven or there is a heaven. He's just saying you as a human need to have a conversation with yourself about, okay, well, if there is no heaven, what am I doing as a person and how's that going to affect my future? The simple possibility that your beautiful heaven doesn't exist. But what's worse is you ignore the fact that this world is far more beautiful than heaven. And that gets to Gras in the moment. I love the way this show does, like, when characters realize things, they're bathed in this white ethereal light, right? And honestly, for Gras having a brush with death, he might believe that. He might want to believe that the world is more beautiful. And he's like, you want to believe it too, don't you? That the world is a wonderful place worth living on. I love that the part in this series, I love that what we're mad at is that people are like, but the world's a great place. Like, that's worth getting people killed over. Floored, amazed, just bewildered. And so he's like, it's ridiculous. And he's like, is that so? And he's like, well, you don't have it here. He's like, it's at this spot. And he's like, on that mountain you see now. He's just tempting them with the evidence of heliocentrism. He's like, now, you could let me go and I could help you find this mountain. You could change your lives for the first time and follow your heart and take your fate in your own hands. Or you can just keep doing the humdrum whatever. The temptation, y'all, the temptation. Or will you stick to the comfort of lifelong self-denial? And that's where I think it got Gras as well, is that Gras knows. It's like he was playing Gras like a fiddle. Will you risk everything for self-affirmation? And it was like music to Gras's ears. I love actually saying as if. I like the shot of the heretic seeing both of them through his eyes. That was so good. And then he's like, please. Oh, I'm so excited. Yes. Oh, I want to see what they find out. Obviously, we know they go to the mountain. My thing is, we still don't know how Akshi gets the necklace. Does he get the necklace from the heretic? How did the heretic get the necklace that was originally Raffles? That is the biggest mystery right now, is where did the necklace come from Raffle? How did it get to Akshi? Obviously, they're going to probably get out of the wagon and escape to the mountain. How does that work? Or maybe they don't. Maybe the heretic gives them the directions, and after he's taken into custody, they go off on their own to find it. No X there, so that makes me concerned. But yeah, I am very curious to see what we're going to get next, and I'm excited to follow along with you all. So anyway, I'm super excited. Akshi is an interesting character, this black Labrador of a man. Gras, I really like Gras's character. Gras is going to die, I'm sure. Akshi's probably going to die, I'm sure. But the question is how, why, and what are we going to find out in between? So anyway, I'm super excited to hear your thoughts down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of ORB on the movements of the earth. Bye.